Okay. How can participatory research teams be structured? And why should I care?
So I have to admit, out of all of these things, I find team infrastructures are by far the most boring. It's hard to get really excited about research when we're just talking about infrastructures. However, they matter. So unless you have a really tiny team, you need to think about your team infrastructure. It's really important in terms of power sharing, individual responsibilities, and ultimately your team's effectiveness. And even in CBPR, community-based participatory research, where we aim for equal power sharing, it doesn't mean that every individual team member has the same power or responsibility. The idea is that the academic part of the team collectively and the community part of the team collectively should share power equally throughout the project. But there's still a need for different roles for different team members. So we do have to think about how to make that happen. There isn't one right answer. How you set up those structures can make a really big difference to the participatory process. So let's start with just traditional research project teams. We already have different roles on a project. In general, we'll have a principal investigator. In some cases, you might have an MPI situation with multiple PIs, but then we'll usually have co-investigators or co-PIs, consultants, project coordinators, research assistants, students, interns, volunteers, depending on where you are in your career, potentially mentors or academic advisors. All of these roles may still exist in participatory research projects. And all of these roles can be held by insider or outsider researchers. As we mentioned in the last Q&A, it's very possible that the PI or any of the consultants or any of the research staff are insider researchers, autistic researchers, research on other marginalized groups, members of those marginalized groups. But this is all still part of the traditional research project team. For participatory research teams, we have to think about what are we going to add to those structures. Leaders and staff need to do a ton of work between team meetings. And this preparatory work can allow the full team to make the most important decisions during team meetings. And then leaders and staff need to implement those team decisions. There's also a ton of additional little decisions that just can't fit into full team meetings. Generally, we'll meet every other week, every month. And here we've got decisions that are being made every day for little things. It's really important to be clear about each person's roles and responsibilities. They may change over time, but it still helps to have them written out. And you can see, for example, in our Aspire toolkit, inclusion toolkit, there's some samples of roles and responsibilities documents for different community partners on different projects. So when I say project leadership, what do we mean by that? Many projects, even participatory research projects, still only have the project leader be the PI, which often is an outsider in autism research, a non-autistic academic PI. It happens often. It's not my favorite approach. I would generally not recommend it, but it is possible to just have the PI be the overall leader. When you're talking about an insider researcher, for example, an autistic scientist, you could now have almost a twofer in that the insider researcher who's the PI can sort of have a foot in both the academic camp and the community part of the project. But again, I would still caution this a little bit, partly because the more people get into academia, the more removed they can sometimes be from the true, from really what the community's needs are, from what the community wants and has to offer. Another option is to have academic and community co-PIs. This is how we did it originally with Aspire, and this is also outside of autism research, for example, how I had done my projects in partnership with the African American Health Coalition. This worked wonderfully for us when we had a community co-PI who truly could dedicate a lot of time and attention and energy to the project. My Aspire original co-PI was Dora Raymaker. My African American Health Coalition co-PI was Corliss McKeever. In each case, these were very strong community leaders who I could worked with incredibly well, and I could really trust them to co-own the project with me. That's not always possible because there isn't always available a community leader who's going to be as dedicated and as invested in the project as the academic partners may be. Another model that we've used, for example, we had done a partnering project on violence against people with developmental disabilities. In that project, we had a steering committee where we had representatives from each of the partnering organizations that were themselves disability-led organizations. As part of a steering committee, we would make sure to go over big decisions to prepare for community meetings with the steering committee. And that worked as a sort of extra little layer between the PIs and the co-Is of the project and the other community members of the team. What we're doing now with Aspire is we have an academic PI and then we have a community project lead. And that's somebody who meets regularly with the PI, really to make sure to prepare for meetings, to kind of be there to speak for the community, to give their input in between meetings, and to really be that kind of back and forth leader that the academic PI can meet with on a regular basis. Some projects, as I mentioned in the other Q&A, really only have a community leader, and they might be hiring an academic as a technician, they might be hiring academics as advisors, they might be hiring academics to just carry out a particular evaluation. So other than the leaders, what happens to the rest of the community partners? Again, as I mentioned before, community advisory boards now see, again, we used to use the term generically, now they seem to imply more that they're just there for advice. We've been using terms like community council to make it more clear that this isn't purely an advisory role. We often have community partners on our research team just being at large. We'll have sometimes community consultants, which are consulting on a particular issue. And then at times we'll hire research staff from the community, for example, to collect data. When I was doing work with the Latinx community, it was often really helpful, or with the African American community, it was often really helpful to have people from the community collecting the data, because they got much better data than somebody from outside of the community would be able to do. We also, for example, right now at Aspire might have smaller work groups. We have a very big project going on right now, and we just can't have everybody involved in creating every little bit. So we'll break up into work groups and we'll have community members involved in different work groups. And then sometimes when you're dealing with clinicians or stakeholders or busy administrative leaders, it's just not feasible to have them meeting all the time with the full team or with community partners. So sometimes we've had kind of separate clinician councils or stakeholder councils, or just one-on-one meetings with key administrators to get their buy-in, to get their input, to get them to agree to things without necessarily taking the time to be at every a full team meeting. And then this is all more for the evaluation side of research. We've also done projects where we're delivering an intervention, and often having community partners deliver the intervention can be quite effective, and peer delivered interventions are, can be particularly useful. So I've been talking primarily about structuring the research project, but sometimes the partnership may involve more than one research project, or it might just be early on and you're even just deciding what projects a group should even do. So you may need center level or organizational level structures. When we first started Aspire, we were all just one team because we were new. But over the course of time now, we have a lot of different research projects, and there's no way we could have every community partner taking part in every project, that would be too much of their time. So we have a steering committee at the organizational level that's made up of the PI, the community project lead, and the project coordinator from each study to make sure that we're all working together and gaining from each other's expertise using similar processes. At the same time, we also have a organizational level community council with representatives from each research project, as well as organizational representatives to help make sure that we can make good decisions as we think about taking on new projects or exploring new areas or bringing on new people. Similarly, a lot of health clinics or health systems may have patient advisory boards that are not specific to one research project, but might be helping them decide what to do and where to go overall. So let's get to the nitty-gritty. Contracts and compensations and all those things. You have to think about which institution is the primary awardee. Is it all going to a university? Is it all going to a community organization? Are there subcontracts to community or academic institutions? Or does the primary grantee pay everybody directly? There's pros and cons to any of this. It's nice if you're in an academic institution and you're doing CVPR, it's nice to have a big subcontract go to a community agency. Fits well with the whole idea of community capacitation with sharing ownership, sharing power. But sometimes that actually may or may not work well if the community agency has the capacity to support such a grant. If people are then going to be employed by the community agency, they might be getting worse benefits or other things. So it's not a black and white issue, but it's certainly something to be thinking about. And then compensation is going to vary with each individual roles. If you truly have a co-PI who's really devoted and spending a considerable amount of time on the project, they're likely going to need to have actual FTE salary on the project. Community project leads or community research assistants may be salaried, but they could also work as hourly employees or they could work as consultants. And then other community members could work hourly, but they also sometimes will get stipends for attending a particular meeting or performing a particular task. One thing to be aware of is cash flow issues. Academia is unbelievably slow. And we're in this world where it doesn't really matter as long as you know you're going to get paid. You're getting your salary. Someday the institution's going to get this. Unfortunately, it gets really difficult with community organizations or community partners, because if you're waiting for a grant, all the paperwork to come through, if you're waiting for the subcontracts, if you're waiting for all this stuff, people are doing work and they're not getting paid. And don't underestimate how incredibly harmful that can be, both to individuals who now literally aren't able to pay their rent or their mortgage, or to a partnership, because there's a lot of ill will that happens from that. So be creative if need be. And certainly I've had to at times figure out ways to get cash flows that aren't necessarily the by the books, just to be able to get people to be able to be paid while we're waiting for things to go through. So take home points from this one. Infrastructures matter. No matter how boring this all may be, it actually makes a difference. Consider ways to include community partners in the leadership if possible. Think about how different structures may allow you to share power and get the work done effectively, and be really transparent about what each person's roles and responsibilities are. Consider how you'll compensate people and how that fits into their infrastructures, and just pay attention to those practicalities. They're not fun, but they can really get you. Be proactive and creative if need be. So up next, we'll be putting together a participatory team. Thank you. And thanks, of course, to our full Aspire team and the